Welcome back to Logan Rando Aquascaping. My name is Logan and today I'm coming at you with a brand new aquascape in my UNS 45U. We're gonna set up a classic nature style aquarium using Manzanita Wood and a variety of colorful plants. So if you like these types of tutorials, be sure to like the channel and subscribe and leave in a comment. It really means a lot to me as well. So let's get started with our tutorial. So first up, we're gonna create a very simple hardscape. And for the first time ever in my aquascaping career, I'm working with Manzanita Wood. I wanted to get my hands on this forever, and I found some at one of my local fish stores. So I picked up a bunch of the wood, and I wanna create a fairly minimalistic layout because for the first time in a long time, I'm creating kind of that nature style, lush, colorful setup. So first thing we gotta do is lay down our soil. As always, I'm working with UNS Controsoil. I like the extra fine granules since I'm typically scaping smaller tanks. Helps maintain a sense of scale. And I'm using about half of a 10-liter bag. And as always, I slope it toward the back. That enhances your depth a little bit. I use a combination of the sand flattener and I use a paintbrush for little coarse movements. I'm also adding a bunch of root tabs into the soil. Typically I run my aqua soil without any enhancement, but lately I've been experimenting with these AQUARIO root tabs, and so far I've gotten really good, healthy plant growth. If you want to get your hands on some, I've got them linked down below in the video description, as well as the other materials I'm using for today's build. It's time to start working with our wood. And I had a rough concept in mind, but sometimes you just got to get in there, start playing with things, put something in, take it out, walk away, adjust the angles. But the Manzanita wood is fairly easy to work with because it's already so impactful and beautiful. One little pro tip is that you might see a scape you really admire that you want to create. Almost never is a hardscape created with one single piece of wood. It's usually a bunch of little pieces of wood combined and glued together in place to look really impactful. So no exception with this scape. I'm using a few pieces of the Manzanita. So next up, we got to get a little bit of stone in there to, number one, add some nice visual impact, but also to provide an anchor point so we can glue the Manzanita wood. If your wood isn't pre-soaked, it will float when you flood the tank, and I'm not gonna let that happen. So I'm working with some beautiful ancient stone that I got from Boost Plant, and I'm just putting it in the position to kind of support the wood so it looks natural, but it's mostly there for structural support. Ultimately, I'm gonna be covering it with some Epiphytes, even though it is really beautiful. And once I was kind of satisfied with things, I actually ended up taking a piece out because I felt it took up too much space. And next up, I'm gluing my wood to the stone. Anytime you glue hardscape to hardscape, you wanna use a cyanoacrylate-based superglue. You can find these almost anywhere. I usually pick it up at the grocery store. Boost Plant carries some. And what you want to do is use a little piece of tissue paper or napkin or paper towel or cotton pad. And then you want to add a generous amount of the liquid superglue to it. There'll be an exothermic chemical reaction, so you'll see a little bit of smoke come out of it. You don't want to breathe that in. It's probably nasty. And then the glue will cure, and the medium, which is the paper towel or the napkin, that'll harden up and sort of act like a mortar between the two pieces of hardscape. So I'm doing these at one contact point for each piece of wood. So here is the finished hardscape. I'm really enjoying it. It doesn't look like much now, but like I said earlier, this scape is really going to emphasize the plants and lush growth. So now it's time for the fun part. It's time to plant. And this part for me is always like coloring in a sketch. We've laid down the foundation. Now it's time to add some color and add some life. So I've got an amazing group of plants that Boost Plant was kind enough to send me. As always, they're a huge supporter of this channel, so shout out to them. We're gonna start off with some background plants. And the first thing I wanna do is lay down some red highlights. For the first time ever, I'm working with Alternanthera, Rhynicii, Rosanervig. And this is a beautiful, larger version of AR Mini. It grows taller, it's got larger leaves, and it has a slightly more pink color. And if you were working with a big tank, this would be an absolutely beautiful mid-ground plant. For a small nano tank like this is a UNS 45U, 9 gallons. It's gonna be the perfect background plant. I'm planting it in two different spots in the back. My good friend Yuri's of Yuri's Yuchayev's Aquascaping, he taught me years ago, whenever you have a highlight, you want it on both sides. That's not to say you can't have some asymmetry in your scape, but when it comes to red plants, Yuri's taught me if you got it here, you gotta put it on the other side too. So that's what I'm doing in the background. And then tying things together, we're gonna add some color and textural contrast with Bacopa Monnieri. This is a beautiful, classic, low demanding plant that will grow nice and tall, but could also be pruned short if I wanted to. And it'll get nice and dense after a few weeks. It's super easy to keep, and if you're the type of person that likes some out of the water immersed growth, this plant is an easy one to experiment with. Next up, we're gonna work the corners with some more green. This time I'm working with Nomophila stricta, aka Hygrophila siamensis. This is a very, very beautiful mid-ground or background plant in our case, and it's low demanding, but will absolutely thrive and be nice and compact with high light and CO2. So really excited to be working with this. I've never kept it personally, though I have kept multiple different species of Hygrophila. So I think we're in for a treat with this one. It's gonna be cool to experiment with something different. And I like how it sort of breaks up the red in the back and ties the background to the midground in a nice little bushy way. Now that we've got our background planting complete, it's time to work our way over to the midground, and I'm gonna plant a variety of crypts. First up, I'm working with my largest crypts, which are Cryptocorin Wenditii brown and Cryptocorin Wenditii green. These crypts are some of the smaller species in the hobby, so they're gonna be perfect for this scape, and eventually they'll grow quite a bit larger than they look right now, and the leaves will kind of intertwine with the wood and really fill out that space and make it look super lush in natural style, which is what I'm going for with this nature style aquascape. So with those larger crypts in place, we're gonna now add our smaller crypts more towards the foreground along the rocks. And for that, I'm using the smallest crypt in this hobby, Cryptocorin arva, and I'm placing it all around the rocks, and it should connect our foreground to the midground and make a nice transition. So with all those crypts in place, we got one more midground plant to use, and this is a plant that is fairly new to the Boost Plant catalog and is fairly rare in general in this hobby. Get ready, this one's a mouthful. This is Hygrophila lancea araguaia, and here's where it gets rare, species chai. This is like a pink variety of Hygrophila araguaia, and under optimal conditions, high light, high CO2, it'll really express that pink. If you don't have those conditions, it might look more like a traditional Hygrophila araguaia, which is like a brownish red color. So I'm adding that to the left and right midground to kind of tie things together. Super excited to be working with this plant. It's one I've wanted for a while, and I'm really happy to hear that Boost is starting to carry it. And that takes us to the foreground. For the foreground, I'm keeping it simple and classic. I'm adding a bunch of Hemianthus calitricoides cuba, one of my favorite plants and probably the finest foreground plant you can have in this hobby. So I'm adding a bunch of it so that it looks really dense from the get-go, but in a few weeks it'll carpet and it'll do really well with the RO soft water conditions that I keep in this aquascape. With that in place, it's time to add our finishing touches. I'm adding my favorite Bucephalandra in the hobby, Bucephalandra Lamandau Purple Mini. I'm adding those on the rocks to kind of tie things together and make this look even more lush. And finally, I've got one little bonus epiphyte that Boost Plant sent me. This is Anubias Stardust Mini, a really beautiful kind of rare Anubias. And I spoke about asymmetry earlier. This is my little point of wabi-sabi, a little chaos to kind of throw things off and add a little asymmetry. So really like this plant. I've kept it before, and I think it will be a really nice addition to the rest of the epiphytes in here. So with all my planting complete, it's time to flood the tank. I'm filling it up with RO water, which is gonna take some time. And as I'm doing that, I'm hooking up my filter and the tubing, and I'm adding minerals. And lately, I've been trying to crack down on plant melt, something that I've always struggled with as an aquascaper. And I learned from watching the Green Aqua video that a non-detectable KH can cause that. So with me keeping RO water and usually only adding GH to my water, this time I'm adding a GH-KH remineralizer, which will hopefully cut down on plant melt, but we'll see. So with the tank flooded and in place, I've got the inline CO2 running, so I'm getting a drop checker on there, and now we wait. This is the most excited for an aquascape I've been in a really long time. I don't really have anything like this in my studio space, so I think it'll make a really fine addition. And in the next video, I'll be sure to show you the progress, and it'll be time to add some critters. So I'm thinking a school of super tiny schooling fish like bararas, you know, maybe 50 of them, and then some tiny little decorative shrimp. Maybe we'll go Caridina this time since I have a lot of Neos in here. But I'd love to hear from you. Number one, what do you think of the tank, and what would you stock in here? Thank you so much for watching. This has been Logan with Logan Rando Aquascaping, and I'll catch you guys and gals next time.